Chapters 2 and 3. History of the Church from its decline till its rejection. Remarks on the addresses to the churches. All the visions contained in the Apocalypse refer to the future, save the first or introductory one, which is of present application. In this, Christ is witnessed in the characteristic glory of the Son of Man in the midst of the seven assemblies. Chapter 1, verses 12 to 16. But did these assemblies, as to their actual condition, answer to the Spirit's designation of them as golden lamps, and in keeping with the holy character of the glorious one in their midst? Alas, no. The features which distinguished the Church in the morning of her birth, in holiness, truth, devotedness, unworldliness, power, and unity, are now in the evening of her days conspicuously absent. For a brief season the golden lamps shone brightly. Now scarcely a glimpse is seen. Open infidelity, which once hid itself in the lecture room, the hall of science, and in the professor's chair, is now securely and openly lodged in the church, in the pulpit, and in the hall of divinity. In these addresses, called for by the state of the assemblies, there is disclosed the point of decline, heart departure from Christ. Chapter 2, verse 4. As a consequence of cooled affections, longing for his personal return from heaven wanes. Matthew 24, verse 48. And thus the door is open for the enemy to enter. The external history of the Church, as here depicted, has been amply verified by contemporary records. Once, the church door was barred and bolted against the entrance of evil and Satan. Now, Satan's throne and dwelling is in the church itself. Revelation 2, verses 13, 20, and 24. Moral darkness is rapidly settling down on these Christianized lands, and we are not far from its last development, the public disavowal of Christianity. It is when Christ gives up the church as his vessel of light and testimony that it becomes a special subject of divine judgment. In the brief epitome of ecclesiastical history as presented in these chapters, not many details are specified, but rather the development of general forms of evil. One leading idea is kept steadily in view, namely Christ's relation to the state of things, presenting himself to each assembly in a character suited to its condition. Christ is the one resource for spiritual decline and weakness. The historian of the times of the Gentiles is Daniel. The historian of the Church is John. The former was for the special instruction of Daniel's people, the Jews. The latter is for the profit of the Church of God. The application of these addresses extends to the whole Church and to everyone who has ears to hear. The moral profit to be derived from an earnest and devout study of these addresses to the assemblies named is immense, and has ever proved helpful to prayerful readers. In these addresses a principle is introduced by which the actual condition of the Church at any time may be determined. The history and testing of the Church come in between the revelation of its original standing in the full blessing of God and its ultimate destiny in association with Christ in glory. Now its past and future condition is the principle by which it is presently judged. What a contrast exists between what the Church was and is. How unlike the resplendent glory awaiting it. In the addresses to the first three assemblies, they are called to repent in view of from whence thou art fallen, whereas in the addresses to the last four assemblies, a return to pristine state is deemed impossible, the goal of hope being the coming of the Lord, which is not directly referred to in the previous church addresses. Ecclesiastical pretension and departure from first love characterized the close of the apostolic period. Ephesus, chapter 2, verses 1 to 7. Next succeeded the martyr period, which brings us down to the close of the 10th and last persecution under Diocletian, chapter 2, verses 8 to 11. Decreasing spirituality and increasing worldliness went hand in hand from the accession of Constantine and his public patronage of Christianity on to the 7th century. Pergamos, chapter 2, verses 12 to 17. The papal church, which is Satan's masterpiece on earth, is witnessed in the assumption of the universal authority and cruel persecution of the saints of God. Its evil reign covers the Middle Ages, the moral characteristics of which have been well termed dark. Popery blights everything it touches. Thyatira, chapter 2, verses 18 to 29. The Reformation was God's intervention in grace and power to cripple papal authority and to introduce into Europe the light which for 300 years has been burning with more or less brilliancy. Protestantism, with its divisions and deadness, shows clearly enough how far short it comes of God's ideal of the Church and Christianity. Sardis, chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Another Reformation, equally the work of God, characterized the beginning of the last century. Philadelphia, chapter 3, verses 7 to 13. The present general state of the professing church, which is one of lukewarmness, is the most hateful and nauseous of any yet described. We may well term this last phase of church history on the eve of judgment the Christless period. Laodicea, chapter 3, verses 14 to 22. Note that the history of the first three churches is consecutive, whereas the history of the remaining four overlaps, and then practically runs on concurrently to the end, the coming of the Lord. One other consideration of interest, and we bring these remarks to a close. The divine element, signified by the numeral 3, is the predominant thought in the first group of churches, whereas the human enters more largely into the second group, signified by the number 4.